Okay, we're recording.
Oh, wow. Man, it's been so long since we've actually recorded.
Yeah, it's been a little bit.
Yeah. So we were debating about how we should go about it. Should we have this long prelude as to why, it took so long? But I think you suggested the right thing where we just jump into it because it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Right. So I agree. So where we stopped last time was book 3 of the Republic and At the Noble Lie. And it was a time that we felt that we could take some time and think about what Socrates was trying to tell us. It was not an easy concept to understand, the noble lie, simply because one had to look at what was literally said in the book and use that to understand what was meant in an allegorical way on how one can order one's mind like a republic, where you have a philosopher king, which is the apex principle, a thought that governs every other thought. And there are guardians that prevent thoughts that should not be governing because they're not of the same metal as the philosopher king. They're not gold thoughts, they're bronze thoughts, and they want the bronze thoughts to rule. They want the gold thoughts to rule, and the guardians prevent that from happening. But that wasn't the lie. The lie was that for every subsequent generation of thoughts that comes up, they believe that that is the order of things, that there are gold thoughts and silver thoughts and bronze thoughts. And if one is a bronze thought, one has to just understand that it is the nature of the world that they have to be, I won't say subservient, but they come below that of a gold thought. And I think that is what the noble lie was about. And that's been misconstrued, I feel, in a very literal translation of what that is from a standpoint of society, where there are some folks who are golden, and then there are some folks who are silver, and then there are some folks who are bronze. And the golden ones rule, the silver ones create order. And then the bronze ones are the ones who follow. But I don't think that's what they meant. I think they meant the ordering of the mind. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I think we would do well to kind of summarize, and I think you're doing a good job with getting us to that point. So remember, so what they're trying to do, Socrates and his interlocutors, or actually his conversational partners, they're trying to essentially magnify an individual to the level of a city, because they're interested in finding about the nature of justice. So they figure, if we can magnify the individual to the level of a city, and then as we construct this hypothetical city with all of its strengths and all of its values and all of its positive features, then therein we could identify justice. And then it would be a matter of shrinking it back down to the level of the individual, because the underlying premise here is that to understand a society, a city, then you must realize that a city or society is really a reflection of an individual at some level. And so they come up, as they're developing this hypothetical city, with essentially an ethos, a myth that everybody, the citizens of this city, will follow, which is the noble lie, which is the myth of the metals. And so Socrates says that this is useful because what it will do is essentially order the society in a way that maximizes harmony, happiness, and so in this hypothetical city, you would theoretically find then the elements of justice, right? And so where we left off was we were talking about one of the roles. The citizens have the different roles. There's the rulers, the guardians and the auxiliary, and the workers. We'll just call them the workers. And so based off of your metal, that determined which role you would play in the society.
Correct.
And so now at the end of book 3, they were talking about the training of the guardians, right? Like, because they realized the indoctrination, the training, the essentially the creation of these guardians is very important for what they do. And what they outlined was that these guardians were really not going to be in a situation where they would be able to accumulate wealth the way the workers would. And they would also not be fully in charge of the whole direction of the city. So the guardians really have a unique role in terms of having a lot of authority within the city, but apparently not much in the way of what we would traditionally regard as reward. And this is the point in the book where Adeimantus points this out. In fact, he interrupts Socrates at the beginning of book 4, which is what we're talking about now. And he says, well, hold on, Socrates. So this all seems well and good, but how are we going to defend this idea of guardians to somebody who is going to question us about this city, this hypothetical city, and our hypothetical ideas about justice? Because it seems the guardians, and he uses the word that the guardians seem to be really the true owners, quote unquote, of the city, and yet they derive no good from the city. So like, how were we going to defend that point?
Yeah.
And then Socrates doubles down and says, well, yeah, not only that, not only are they not going to be able to accumulate wealth, but they're going to get meager subsistence. They're going to get just enough to survive, to live, and to get their needs met, but they're not going to become rich, wealthy men. And so Socrates explains that this is a very important idea because Adeimantus is worried that the guardians will be unhappy. And Socrates says, well, but remember what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create a happy city. We're not trying to create a happy group within the city. We're trying to maximize the total prevalent happiness of this city. And so he uses this really nice analogy of a statue. So like, you know, when people see Greek statues in a museum, they're usually just plain white. And people maybe don't realize that actually those statues were painted very ornately back in the heyday of Greek culture. And so Socrates uses the analogy saying, well, if you're trying to make a beautiful statue, you're not going to put all your effort into making the eyes look particularly exotic to the point where they don't even look like eyes anymore. You'd paint them fancy. They use the color purple here because purple back then was a very rare and difficult to obtain color to replicate. You wouldn't paint the eyes purple and just make these very ornate eyes and then all of a sudden leave the rest of the body to look plain. He's saying that the beauty of the statue is in its cohesive appearance, its ideal appearance. And so he uses that analogy to say that what we're trying to do is build the ideal city, which means that the ambient happiness is high, not the happiness of one particular group of citizens. That's the first point he made, that the guardians can't be in pursuit of happiness for themselves per se. They must derive some sense of fulfillment in terms of the success of the city in and of itself. And therein, you can already read, as you read that, the implication that Socrates is making is that as you realize that this is an analogy of basically of how to order your mind, it very much speaks to this idea of having a guiding principle, having discipline to it, and understanding that there are certain things that you do in life for their own sake and not because of the reward for it. And that's where you have the deeper sense of fulfillment when you're in conversation with life events. That's really where you find true fulfillment. But the second point that he makes is that if we did allow the guardians to become wealthy, they would no longer be true to their identity. And Socrates is pointing out this fact that if wealth actually has a corrupting effect on a person or on a group of people in terms of their role, serving their role. And so in order to make sure that the guardians do not lose the adherence to their identity, their role in the city, they must not become wealthy. And then Socrates doubles down further and says, by the way, these guardians will be in charge of not letting anybody become wealthy or impoverished either, because Socrates points out that those two have an effect on your ability to be true to your role. Okay, so in my mind, as I was reading all of this, I was drawing very direct analogies to drive, like your human drives, like your drive for pleasure, your drive for ambition, your drive to do things that are not necessarily going to be fulfilling, but going to be like short short-term gain, long-term loss sorts of things. And it was clear to me that when he's talking about these guardians not succumbing to desires for wealth, but at the same time not allowing things to become impoverished, what it really pointed down to was that there's sort of this discipline that's being baked into the city. And it's very similar to the discipline that would have to be part of any sort of cognitive or mental or intellectual structure that you would make in your mind as you develop a system for guiding your decisions, your actions off of a rational principle. And so that's where I was taking this conversation. And I'm curious to see or hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's those similar thoughts. It's very logical, the argument that they make. Starts with, like you said, about, why would one be happy if one is limiting themselves to living a life just in the pursuit of the common good and nothing for just the personal gain. Mm-hmm. And he makes a very good case, like you said, about why would that be a better life than a life just of personal gain. And he doesn't directly say that he wants he wants guardians to not have money or accrue wealth. He says that guardians will prevent the city from this insidious forces of wealth and poverty that would come in. And the ones who would succumb to wealth and poverty would be the auxiliary, the workers, right? He gives the example of the carpenter or the potter.
And he even points out that in a way that's okay, because if they do, it's less important. I mean, it's not ideal, but it won't destroy the city. But if the guardians succumb to those sort of pressures, then the city is lost.
And he talks about this, that it is important for every citizen to know their place inside of the republic, simply because it is the mindset of the people that leads to the mindset of the people influences how they interact with one another and the personal contracts that they have with one another. And that then affects the laws, and that then affects the constitution. We like to believe that it is the constitution and the laws that make people behave a certain way. But this turns out to be the closer to the truth than the former argument about constitutions creating certain people. It's the people who create the constitutions. And it is each citizen's responsibility to understand their place in this republic. Understanding that if one is wealthy and if another is impoverished, both of those are signs of a sick or ailing republic, mm-hmm. and not of a thriving republic. Wealth and poverty, both, right? And if you look at modern society, if you look where we are right now, that's rampant. Both wealth and poverty, both are rampant. And so the way he says that there would not be a focus on accumulation of wealth or the lapse of certain groups of people into poverty would be everybody understanding their role. But how does one understand their role? Or what is in fact conventional and what is in fact in line with the common good and in line with true capital H happiness as opposed to small h happiness, which is conventional happiness. He gives examples of conventional happiness where you have wealth and you are dining people and you have influence and you're sacrificing and you're doing all of those things as a matter of show, as opposed to you're just participating in the order of society and the common good. Correct? So how does one understand what it is to participate in the common good, what it is to have capital H happiness? And capital H happiness, you speak to anybody who has been through life, comes to understand that going from pleasure to pleasure to pleasure to pleasure, that small h happiness only leads to dissatisfaction and unhappiness. I mean, it's happened to us as well, right? There's only that much Netflix and candy that one can eat, right? After which you start getting sick and have a headache, right? But the happiness, capital H happiness, lies in sacrifice, lies in suffering, voluntary suffering that you bring upon yourself for the betterment of someone else. Therein lies satisfaction. That's a capital H happiness. That's what the guardians are being asked to do, is to sacrifice their personal gain for the gain of the republic. That's what the potter is being asked to do, sacrifice their personal gain for the gain of the republic. And each individual member of society has to then go ahead and understand that in their sacrifice lies capital H happiness.
Yeah.
But how does one get there? Right? The way to get there is through education.
Yeah.
The right education, and avoiding pervasive influence of the incorrect type of education. And they talk a little bit about music here, right? And that's just one example, because we've spoken about education. Socrates has spoken about education, the physical education, the intellectual education, how the intellectual education is prose and music and things like that. He talks about how just by changing the styles of music can bring about change in the mindset of the people. But that is just a way of saying that one has to. This is not about censorship. This is not about what a government should do.
Yeah.
Right? It's about how you and me need to understand that we are influenced by something new that we see, and we turn away from the truth that is evident to us, that in sacrifice lies happiness, capital H happiness. And it's not in pursuing the latest and greatest thing that's out there, that's being flashed in front of us in whatever media form or whatever that we can expose ourselves to.
Yeah. I mean, over and over, Socrates hammers this point in, which is that the education of the guardians is really the centerpiece for this whole system. Like, their understanding of what it means to be virtuous, what it means to be aligned with the greater good, is something that is, again, central to this idea. It's basically the linchpin to this whole structure. And to the point where, he talks even further about the role of the guardians here is not only to sort of prevent the corrupting or negative effects of wealth or poverty on the whole system, not only of themselves, but of the system, but also to preserve the harmony and unity of the city, to the point where, if the city becomes ambitious and decides to expand its boundaries, the guardians are there to actually reel that in and say, the city will not get any larger than absolutely necessary. Basically, the city will not outgrow its own sense of unity, because Socrates cautions against this idea of expansion for its own benefit. I mean, how many times in history have you seen that, where history is basically a littered storybook of empires that have risen and fallen. And to think that we're in an exceptional age, I think, is naive, because empires fall precisely because they have aligned the outcomes, the priorities, have nothing to do with virtue or the common good at some point. The further away you get from this idea of the common good, the further away you get from this idea of some form of human solidarity or harmony or unity, things will eventually fall. And in fact, later on, Socrates talks about, he essentially is sort of talking about the just city, but they often reference the opposite, the unjust city, or things that they've seen in their own experience in civil discourse, where Socrates talks about, demagogues, when they take over, how they rise in popularity very rapidly by precisely telling people what they want to hear. Not the truth at all, but just telling them what they want to hear. And explaining how it is that in a way you should pity that situation, because that is an unsustainable model that will never last in a significant way, because what is happening is that you're essentially muddying and driving the mindset of the population away from the truth. And then as soon as that becomes, and so he's pointing out a lot of issues in this chapter that if somebody would read it, there's sort of this strange and very interesting brew of things that at the face of it you could interpret as authoritarianism, and things that you could read as critiques of democracy and democratic discourse. But I think that's a very superficial interpretation. When you read down deeply what he's talking about, first, as I read about it, I agree with you. I think he's clearly talking about setting up frameworks for how you should order your mind, your decision-making capabilities, and that sort of thing. But I'm not so sure or convinced that he is essentially espousing an actual city to be built. And I think there's people that struggle with that. And as you pointed out in earlier episodes, there's been leaders who have actually taken the republic and said, well, we're going to build this republic and try, and it's blown up in their face. So looking at it through the lens of, okay, well, this is a way to come up with a framework of living, then again, the recurring theme here is that the guardians are really they're the talisman. They're the avatars of the disciplined, ordered life. So once you align your approach to living with a rational principle like this, you have to have a system for keeping everything in line. All of the components of the city represent part, I think, of the human experience. The drives that we have, to me, that's the workers. The guardians really represent our own temperance, our own determination, our own opinions of self-worth and self-actualization. But then the rulers, that is philosophy. That is your philosophical principle. That is your rational principle. And so if you order essentially your approach to life, of your mindset, however you want to call it, then really what you are saying is that the guardians play a very important role because they represent your ability to listen to the voices, your sense of what is right in that situation. The daemon that Socrates would say, listen to your daemon. And I think a lot of times people in life make choices knowing full well that they're not listening to their daemon. They're not listening to this sense of right action. It's sort of like kind of this quiet, observing voice that's in the background. And people just sort of will say, well, I'm going to do this thing. But I think for many people, there's a point where they have a deep understanding that what's happened here is that the drives have overcome the guardians. The drives have overruled the rulers. And the rational principle was squelched. And they end up paying the price and learn about it later when things don't really work out. Or maybe they don't. But that in a way is a tragedy too, because they go down this life path that eventually will reveal itself to them that says, well, you didn't really have a fulfilling life. And that this sense of unease that you have is because, well, you know what? Because you painted the eyes purple is what you did with your life. And you didn't leave any paint for the rest of the statue.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I agree with you. I think there is the who are the guardians? The guardians probably is the drive, the will to do something, the power to get it done rests with the guardians. Why to do it rests with the apex principle, the rulers, and how it gets done rests with the workers.
Right.
And so then you have these three orders. All of this exists inside of our mind. And so if you have a ruler that is misled, one believes in the only reason to do anything, we've discussed this before, the ends of all the whys is happiness. We want to be happy. Now you call it happiness, satisfaction, eudaimonia, right? The best life,
right?
The span of life that has all the good things in it. That's what we want for ourselves. And if we are not careful and our apex principle misconstrues what eudaimonia is and how that is achieved, it then orders the guardians to drive the working capabilities inside of our minds to start doing things that we would believe will make us happy. The car, the spouse, the title, the house, the whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And that is
all the surrogate markers of success.
All the surrogate markers, conventional markers of success.
Markers of success.
And now you are being driven by the guardians who are not. You're driven by the guardians who are not educated. They have let wealth and this insidious forces creep into your republic, and now your workers want to accrue money, right? And so many times you've heard that I'm going to work and make enough money, and then I'm going to retire.
Right.
I've had conversations with people who would say this exact same thing, that, man, when you spoke to them in their 30s, they were like, I have loans to pay. I have mouths to feed. I want to buy this house. It's $2 million and I want to pay it off because I don't want to be indebted to anybody. So I'm going to work. I'm going to do whatever it takes, whatever faculties are available to me to pay it off. And once it's done, then they're like, you know what? I don't want to participate in this anymore. This is unethical. I want to step back. Right. And so what that goes to show is that they were driven by a master that didn't have the right idea about what it is to participate in the common good, or what it is to actually be aligned with virtue. They were intemperate. They had an intemperate ruler, and then they had guardians who were intemperate, and they had workers who were intemperate, and they accrued wealth intemperately, right? And now there's a price to pay for that, because now you look back at your life and you're like, what have I done? What have I done? And so there you go. There's your shot at eudaimonia has gone away anyways. But so what does it look like then for a mind that is ordered, that is led like the way it is supposed to be led? So if you draw a comparison, if you draw a contrast between these two minds, a mind that is led by an apex principle, that is in fact a gold thought. They understand the difference between good and evil because they've lived the breath of life and they've come to understand what it means to have right action. They have true opinion, right? You can't have knowledge of what is good and evil, but you can come very close to it. And so that mind, as opposed to a mind that hasn't yet understood that.
Or at least the commitment to search for
correct. It's
true, right?
So
there's a healthy skepticism that Socrates thinks that people lack.
If you just contrast those two minds, right? One, a mind that is in the pursuit of happiness and is walking that path, and the other one that doesn't even understand what is the difference between small h and capital H happiness, and that capital H happiness even exists. If you look at those two minds, the mind that doesn't understand the difference between the true happiness and just happiness that just comes from pursuit of vices or pleasures. That mind has to keep having conversations with its subsequent thoughts and the order of thinking in their mind about what is the right action. In this situation, I'm going to do this. In that situation, this doesn't apply. It's going to keep creating laws and rules and laws and rules each time. And it's going to keep coming up against the world. And some of these laws will work and some of them won't work. And it's a constant process of reinventing the wheel and reordering its structure. And in what happens is that it's like a sick person. A sick person, he gives us example here.
Yeah.
Where
great analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the sick person is always looking for this next best thing that is going to make them feel better, not understanding the reason why they're sick is because of their intemperate ways. There are things that they're doing in their life that's making them sick. And the power to change comes from within and not from an external source, not from a pill or from a trial or from a therapy or from a device.
Right.
The change has to come from
within.
They
draw the analogy of this person who's suffering ailments from their pleasure-seeking lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And they're looking for snake oil to feel better.
Or even not even snake oil, whatever they're looking for from outside.
Right. An amulet, some superstition, whatever. Mm-hmm. But and this gets back to the original point that I was making, was that those people are easily misled. Mm-hmm. Those citizens are easily misled. And it's the citizen with the forethought and the wisdom to tell them the truth that, well, no, the reason you feel terrible is because you live this very intemperate life. They hate that.
Right. So inside of that person's mind, right? Inside of this mind, the mind that is just being wafted about by fate and chance, right? And they're just being constantly pushed around by their vices, by their desires, right? This is 90% of us, right? That's where we are. In that mind, there is a thought, that apex principle does exist somewhere, which is telling them, hey, listen, the reason why you're feeling bad is because of what you're engaging in. The problem is you. You need to change what you're doing. This way of living is not good for you. And what happens is you end up suppressing that thought, saying, no, that thought is wrong. I'm great. I'm awesome. I've got this. This is how the world is. The world
This is what I'm supposed to do.
This is what I'm supposed to do.
You have no skepticism directed at convention.
Right. Nice people end up last. They finish last. You know, I need to push and I need to crush my opposition. I need to acquire this. I need to achieve that.
Just while I'm doing that.
Yeah, and that comes secondary. That probably comes later on in life.
That's back to Thrasymachus, right? So,
but my point is that this thought that tells them, hey, you need to change the way you think about life, that thought gets squashed as weakness. That's a weakness.
Yeah.
People who think this way are weak, right? So that is one way of thinking, right? This disordered, chaotic republic where the apex principle and the guardians and the workers are just working in a way to get too big, to expand too much, to accumulate too much. Either they are wealthy or they are poor.
Right.
And that is leading to strife and rebellion within.
The city that pursues what feels good instead of what
is good. Right. Doesn't even understand the difference between the two. Right. That city, that republic that exists in minds of 99% of us, right? I'm in that situation too many times, as opposed to the well-ordered republic, where the apex principle understands the difference between good and evil, right? Understands what eudaimonia means, understands participating in the common good means, understands what temperance means. Don't grow too much, don't accumulate too much, don't be impecunious, but don't be wealthy, don't be exorbitant, right? Live simply, live for others, sacrifice so that you feel good about your actions. That apex principle then tells its guardians to go about and make sure that the faculties that can go about and procure and act and participate in the world do so in the path of the common good.
In accordance with that principle.
Right, exactly. Right? In that situation, you don't have to make too many laws about I'll do this in this situation and that in that situation. Some other situation I'm going to change it. Oh, wait, this doesn't work. I'm going to go back and keep changing. Every few days you're thinking about doing something different. You know, maybe it is if I change the color of my car, maybe I'll feel better. Maybe if I change my zip code, I'll feel better. Maybe if I change my job, I'll feel better. Maybe if I change my spouse, I'll feel better. As opposed to I participate in the common good. All of these other things are just distractions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is the contrast that is being created in the early stages of this chapter. And when they create this contrast between the well-ordered city, the well-ordered mind, and the disorganized city and the chaotic mind, then they kind of find, okay, now let's look at this well-ordered city and see if we can find justice inside of the city. Because going back to chapter 1 of Republic, the entire endeavor is to figure out what is justice.
Right.
Socrates defined justice. And all of this is in the aim to kind of find justice.
Yeah.
That kind of brings us to a point where we could take a break. I'm obviously interested to hear your thoughts on this, but beyond this is about how they go about proving each of those, the presence of wisdom, the presence of courage, the presence of temperance, and then the presence of justice. And I think we could talk about in the next episode. But what are your thoughts about this contrast that has been created, especially the ailing society or the ailing mind? Because you're physicians, so there's something to be said about that, about modern medicine, and it draws direct comparisons. Even back in the day, they understood that they were diseases of excess, right? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of speaks to the idea, when you read this chapter, polypharmacy, it takes a whole new meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because now it's like polypharmacy is the result of, sort of the accumulation of rationally driven evidence.
Yeah.
But it points out there is a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Correct.
And so, we have a lot of knowledge about how to treat chronic conditions and things like that. But we have very little wisdom about the fact that we keep falling into these ailments that have to do with very indolent, sedentary, I'll say it, pleasure-based lifestyles. Yeah. And people are talking about it, but there is no teeth behind that message. There is no force behind the message that says we are not living the way we're supposed to. Yeah. And we've extracted amazing medications and done, clinical trials to look at all of these issues that we're taking care of. And the reason we're having to use all of these resources and direct them toward that goal is, again, there is a noble aspect to this. I believe that, but I also think that there's a larger piece of the puzzle that's being missed here, which is that the rational principle, the rulers here are essentially missing. They're the rulers that we're trying to follow are the ones that shouldn't be in charge. We basically have bronze medal principles, and we're essentially, like essentially handlers, like custodians, trying to sweep up the mess of that. And our role as physicians, I think, has to involve a lot more of the other side of the equation, which is to say, we have to change our lifestyles. Like, this lifestyle is not sustainable.
Yes.
And we have to make some serious changes here. And it's all well and good to continue the evidence-based quantitative pathway to do all the things that we need to do to take care of people that are ill. But we cannot completely ignore and take a hard look at the truth of what the sources of these ills are.
Yeah.
And then educate. Just like Socrates said, like, education is everything. But we're at a huge disadvantage here, because we're in a situation where the care of the patient who is suffering from these ailments that result from sedentary lifestyles is rewarded much more clearly, much more obviously, and much more expectedly, conventionally speaking, than the effort one puts into sort of educating the populace on, like, better eating habits, activity levels, really reformatting your life in a way that leads toward health, as opposed to the conventional decline that we've all accepted.
I would change the narrative just a little bit. I agree with you, but I'll change just a little bit. Based on the readings, I feel that there's a different way to look at this. The education that we are talking about is not about educating people to exercise. The education that one could give everybody who's of a certain age, certain experience, is reading of the Republic. Because what that does then is it changes fundamentally who every individual citizen is that makes up the Republic that exists in the country today. Just like how one would order their mind inside of themselves to change who they are as a Republic themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Every individual would then have to do their part to change the Republic. We would like to believe that there is a sense of agency here, right? That the person who is obese because they eat the wrong stuff, they don't exercise, they're lazy or whatever, and that what they can do, all they need to do is get up from that couch and stop putting those burgers in your mouth and go for a walk, and that's it. That will take care of everything for you. And we blame people for their illnesses, right? But there's another way of looking at it, is the socioeconomic reasons why someone chooses to eat burgers and sits on a couch. And there are many reasons for it. But we could end the conversation there and say this is a socioeconomic problem, right? That this is a problem that the treatment for this is external. Someone has to change the system. And that's it. If you're a cursory reader of this, you could take that second level or second order thinking and leave it there. But if you read the Republic, it goes back to that it is in fact the people who determine the culture. It's not the culture that defines the people. Each and every individual, if they were temperate and they understood what temperance means and how sacrifice, discomfort, simple living leads to happiness, right? If they understood that and understood that eudaimonia lies at the end of sacrifice, of simple living, of simple pleasures, they would then choose that over what we choose right now. The society gives us donuts because we want to eat donuts. It is not the other way around. It's not that the donut was invented and that's why people started eating donuts. We are predicated to sit on couches. We are predicated to not exercise. We are predicated to be in climate-controlled environments. And that, the more you live in climate-controlled environments and you lay on a couch and eat unhealthy food, the sicker you get, the worse you feel. And you believe that you need to do more of the same or something else, like play video games on top of it to feel better. Whereas in fact, all you need to do is understand that eating rich food and not exercising and being uncomfortable makes you unhappy. And that change has to happen from within. And once you have a population that wants to be uncomfortable, that wants to eat less, that doesn't want a lavish lifestyle, guess what? There'll be no donut sellers on the street.
Yeah, but there's somebody selling donuts, and why are they selling donuts? You see, even then, I think I see your point, and I agree to some extent, but I do think there's a dialectical relationship between the individual and the society, and I think that's one of the main points of Republic, which is, well, if you want to find perfect justice, you build the just city, and then you examine the citizens of that city. And so I think there's an interplay between the individuals, the culture of a society, and I think there's a dialogue that goes back and forth. So I think convention is very much the result of individual preferences, biases, education levels or lack thereof. And I think what they see reflected back toward themselves from the culture can be influenced by the individuals and vice versa. But I think there is dual responsibility. So I'm not one that would say, oh, the obesity crisis is because of, people just eating. I understand that they have limitations in food choices. They have different levels of understanding about what it means to eat healthy. And they are embedded in a society that essentially is feeding them foods. And so I think it's actually both. I think, again, the point is that there has to be change at several levels because all the levels matter.
Well, Eddie, let me put it a different way. Let me put the argument to you a different way. The person who's selling you donuts is not selling you so that he makes you sick. He sells you donuts because he feels that he makes you happy.
Well, that person's trying to make money because they're in the same society.
If you ask people who make donuts, Krispy Kreme, every employee at Krispy Kreme will tell you that he likes to see the smiles on the kids' faces when they eat donuts. Yeah, they're not walking in there saying that I work for a company that makes people fat and obese and cause them diabetes, right?
Right.
And once they understand that, probably they would change what they do. But I'm not saying that. My point is that it talks about the politician, who keeps changing the laws, who instead of speaking for justice, speaks what the populace wants to hear.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you cannot blame that politician for doing that.
Right.
Because he serves a population that wants him to do that. Because that population is going to subdue or imprison or even kill somebody who points out their ills to them. And this is directly for what happened to Socrates. Socrates was that guy who pointed out the ills of society and they put him to death. Mm. And so Plato brings this up here. He says
I agree. And he points out that you should actually pity that society.
Right.
And it's true.
And that's the society that we live in right now.
Right.
If you were to go out there and start a store now, now it's changed where you can sell healthy food. Mm. Right? If you were to open a health food store 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people would laugh you off. Right? They would say it sucks and, it's terrible. It doesn't taste good. Like, what's this guy doing here? Mm. Now there is a market for healthy food because society's kind of come around a little bit. It is the demand of the people that drives the business. It's the demand of the people that drives industry. One has to understand that we have a role to play in this. And we would like to believe that we don't. We are driven by society to do so. We are, if we don't order ourselves inside of our minds. Once we are ordered inside of our minds, we are no longer wafted around by whatever is out there.
Right. The whims of society at that point.
You would drive by donut shops to go to the gym. You do it. We all do it right now because we understand what it means. Eating the donut feels good right now, but causes problems later. And we understand that fact. We're ready to give it up. We are temperate that way. We understand sacrifice that way because it makes us happy. Like you secretly feel good that you're not tempted by a donut. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. And that comes to us. It didn't come because we read the Republic. I'm not saying that that's what happened. But a donut is a very silly, pithy example of what we're trying to say here, right? We are talking about the pursuit of the big things in life. Where we work. Should we pay our taxes? Should we, what should we be charitable? how much money, how much luxury, how much do we accumulate for ourselves? How much do we give away? These big questions, which actually matter when you're lying on your deathbed, this can only be answered if one has been educated the right way. And I think that education doesn't come from someone telling you, hey, be charitable. Hey, don't accumulate too much, be temperate, as opposed to understanding that by yourself, by going through life, participating in reading, and then organizing your thoughts and really keep reevaluating your thoughts, saying, are these gold thoughts that are driving me?
Yeah. But however you arrive at that conclusion, it makes sense. There's kind of a quality to all of this, right? Because Socrates would be the first to point out that he really didn't teach anybody anything. He just sort of helps people arrive at the conclusion that seems to make the most sense to them. And so I also think it's very telling in this that the guardians have internal responsibilities and external responsibilities, right? Mm-hmm. So they're in charge of preventing wealth and poverty within the city, but they're also the defenders of the city. And they're also the ones that are in charge of essentially not allowing the city to overextend its boundaries, literally and figuratively speaking. And again, so if you take that analogy to the individual, well, that's what discipline and temperance is all about. It's ordering yourself, but then ordering yourself to align yourself so that you have good cooperative relationships with your fellow humans. And I think that's a very important point to make here, that true discipline, the discipline that leads to perfect justice, is one that has equal curated attention directed externally toward your fellow citizens, and one that is internally directed as well, as far as ordering your decision-making faculties.
Yeah. Capital D discipline, not the small d discipline that says, I wake up at 5 in the morning.
Which we could say is temperance as well, right?
So, but the small d discipline is, because you use discipline as, this person is very disciplined. He wakes up at 5 in the morning and hits the gym. He doesn't eat an ounce of carbs. And, that kind of discipline is not what we're talking about here. I'm talking about the capital D discipline. The
capital D discipline in my mind is temperance. I like the word temperance better. Discipline is tricky. And I think the reason discipline in and of itself, I would draw a distinction between temperance and discipline. Temperance I think has a lot of overlap with discipline, but I think temperance encapsulates something larger than just discipline.
Yes.
Because discipline, right. Because what you're talking about with discipline is unique because discipline applied toward a just end is great, but discipline can be very misused. I mean, history is rife with examples of where discipline brought humanity to the brink of just depraved, just egregious violations of morality. And so discipline is tricky, and I think temperance is kind of the right word.
You need to be disciplined to be temperate, but not all temperate people.
Yeah, I mean, you could be evil and disciplined, and you could really wreck some lives.
Not all disciplined people are temperate.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, right. So, and so the idea, the other thing that occurs to me too is that, I still like in my mind, as I read through this, I still like the idea of the guardians. I understand that what they represent at the individual level, but I think the guardians represent something at the lifespan level. And this is not something that's discussed here, but you could talk about a city representing an individual, but you can also talk about all these frameworks representing an entire life. And so I think I said earlier that I think the guardians are your decisions. Like the decisions you make in life are the ones that guard you from, these situations where you're living and moving away from the common good and your own good, internally derived sense of fulfillment that are based off of, your cooperative and relationships with your fellow humans, with human solidarity. And so I still think that if you took Republic and you stretched it out, not just at the level of the individual, but the level of a lifetime, I think the guardians still represent decisions in my mind, because decisions that's the inflection point where your principle and action meet, right? Because all of this is useless unless you're talking about action in life. And so I like to use phrases like your decision-making faculty or the decisions that you make in life, because your decisions those are the expressions of what you have going on internally. And to the extent that you have things aligned with things like virtue, the common good, human solidarity, and your own internal discipline, your decisions are going to be reflections of those things. And the decisions you make in life, not totally, but in response, whether it's in response to some negative event or whether it's some decision that you're making about life, your future, the decisions that you make based off of a rational principle will logically be the ones that actually preserve you and guard you against anything that would impede your well-being.
Yeah.
Right?
So if you think about it, I would say it's not all decisions really. It is the governing of action. So the why should you do a certain action comes from the rulers. How you get that action accomplished comes from the workers. And the will to go from why to how comes from the guardians.
Right. And so to me, that's why I still like the idea,
that works because
decision works. Right. Decision is like the meeting of will and action, and will informed by philosophical concepts and action. So again, I still think, I don't think Socrates in here, he's saying that guardians are your decisions. I think he's saying that your guardians are essentially your temperance, your internal discipline, externally directed discipline. But that's just sort of how I read this. My layering, my interpretation is that. So, well, anyway, so this would be a good time to wrap it up, because at the end of this discussion, because basically now they've finally stopped talking about, okay, what the role of the guardians are. And so
not only that, they've actually given you what a well-ordered city,
looks like, and even contrasted it with one that's just disordered.
And now you're going to look inside of that city.
And so Socrates says, all right, son of Ariston, you now have your city. And now we get into like the really good part, because now the search for justice begins.
That's right.
And so we'll talk next about the next part of book 4, where the search for justice actually begins now that the just city has been built.
Awesome.
We'll just leave it there.
Yeah.